Welcome to the webinar. I'm Krista Campbell. Thank you for joining us today for SCWA's Technical Revolution, a user-friendly approach to communicating water main breaks using GIS. Before we get started, I would like to encourage you to ask questions. You can post your questions in the questions dialog box at any time during the webinar. We will have time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted in the water utility space on GeoNet, as well as the Esri Water Meetup group. You will receive a follow-up email that includes links to both of these locations. It takes a few days to get the recording published online, so it'll probably be available towards the end of next week. In today's webinar, you will learn how Suffolk County Water Authority is using web maps and collector for ArcGIS to support response to unplanned main breaks, providing real-time information to staff. Keeping everyone informed has saved them time and money through increased efficiency, and it's also provided data for analysis. Joining me from Suffolk County Water Authority is Jim Touche, GIS Manager, and Brad Feldman, Senior GIS Analyst. For nearly 27 years, Jim has worked in the engineering and water resources field, utilizing GIS for environmental and watershed protection, planning and land preservation, infrastructure analysis, and mapping. Since 2005, he has led his team as GIS Manager within Suffolk County Water Authority's Office of Strategic Initiatives, developing GIS-based solutions for a diverse variety of departments and field staff. Brad is currently the Senior GIS Analyst at the Suffolk County Water Authority. He helps to develop and maintain various desktop and mobile ArcGIS online applications for Water Authority personnel, as well as public-facing, Long Island-wide collaborative water quality mapping application. So that's your introduction to Jim and Brad. We're going to jump right in. All right, audience, we have the polling question launched. Are you using any of the following applications? ArcGIS Online, Web App Builder for ArcGIS, Collector for ArcGIS, Operations Dashboard for ArcGIS, and you're not using. It looks like we have about 80% of our attendees using ArcGIS Online. About 45% are using Web App Builder. A big percentage, almost 60%, using Collector for ArcGIS, about 40% Operations Dashboard, and about 20% not using applications. Thank you, everyone, for responding. We're going to close the poll, and let's get back to Jim and see how they're doing. All right, Jim, are we able to unmute?
I apologize for all this. Lord knows what happened here, but thank you to everybody and being patient with this. So we want to take you through the Water Authority's technical revolution. And what I say is that, you know, this isn't a revolution of pitchforks and torches, but it's a real revolution of the increasing embracing of technology by both people and diverse groups throughout the Water Authority. I'm Jim Touche. I'm here with Brad Feldman, and a major part of the word revolution is evolution. So we really want to take you through how we've evolved from where we've been, where we're at today, and where we would like to go. So before we get too deep into the applications, and again, centered around ArcGIS Online, what we like to do is just take you through who the Suffolk County Water Authority is. So we're a public benefit corporation, and we're not an entity of the county itself. We just happen to be, oh, thank goodness, that alarm is off, and I hope it stays off. Well, not quite. So we're quite large. We cover about 2/3 of Suffolk County. Suffolk County is on the eastern end of Long Island in New York. So we have over 1.2 million customers. As you can see, we've been around for quite a long time, since 1951. We do operate also as a not-for-profit. And that last one I want to touch on, because that's really important. The Water Authority, the Suffolk County Water Authority, so we say the largest groundwater supplier in the country. Well, what does that mean? We are not the largest public water supplier in the country itself, but we depend 100% on the water that we pull out of the ground to bring out to our customers right to the tap. So we depend on 3 aquifer systems within Suffolk County itself. We have, and you'll see here, an awful lot of infrastructure. So let's kind of get into that. And as I mentioned, we support over 1.2 million people. Really, that equates to over 400,000 customers. So it's a pretty significant population. And as you can see here, for what we serve in blue is a pretty fair portion of Suffolk County itself. There are unserved areas where we could potentially pioneer out and serve public water to people that in populated areas may still be on a private well. And indeed, there are other water districts in Suffolk County. And with that large area, again, serving over 600 square miles out of the 900 square miles of Suffolk County, there's an awful lot of infrastructure. So you can see an awful lot of wells, and with an employee base that's just under 600 people, an awful lot to be concerned about. But because we're talking about water main breaks today, of which just this year we've passed now more than 5,900, we're just over the 6,000 mile mark of water main. Interestingly, and the type of material type that actually is most susceptible to breaks that we found within our system happens to be cast iron, of which fully half of our system is cast iron. We no longer use cast iron all that much, and you'll see why. But again, an awful lot of water main of cast iron, and it is susceptible to temperature changes. We're really getting into the cold season now, and once Brad takes you into the demo, you'll get to see a little bit more about that. So here's I mentioned our evolution, so I want to talk about that. And we say Stone Age to the GIS age, and you know, the Stone Age for us wasn't all that long ago, and some of that's still Stone Age technology we might describe here. It may seem a little humorous, is still in action. So let's go through that. So, you know, you see the little guy in the tin can, and you know, that might represent a slide that I'll show you in a moment, which is radio communications as two-way radio. Then we get into more what I'll call that modern communication, whether it be cell phones or flip phones or otherwise, and I'll be talking about that a little bit too. And then we get into what sometimes us GIS folks fancy ourselves as Professor X from the X-Men, but the truth is in all seriousness, is we really want all of us as a community of GIS users to be fully connected into that critical information. So let's go into what we're calling the Stone Age, and we were really dependent, and in all honesty, we do still keep our two-way radios in place. They are a critical fallback, and they are tested out. There's our friend Tom D'Angelo there testing out our two-way radios. But the one thing I should mention too, the difficulty back in the day with two-way radios is that, as you can imagine, when you have an emergency condition, you have people in the field and people in the office, and once you get more than just a couple of people on that two-way radio throughout that network and that system, people kind of step on each other verbally, and sometimes it really gets hard to figure out exactly what's going out in the field and what's occurring in the office. One thing you'll see here too that is going to be pervading throughout the rest of this is that here there's a lacking, and what we don't see here is evidence of some sort of graphical representation of what's going on both in the office and in the field, and that kind of, well, what we say now is what we base it around is ArcGIS Online. Well, we didn't have that at the time, but it was the best we had. So it's easy to call it Stone Age, but it was the best of what we had. Now, if we move into what we call this middle age communication, I would say about a dozen years ago from our own GIS department, we really started to promote the use of ArcReader for both in the office and in the field. And what you see here, that little corner snapshot, is the use of ArcReader in the field for a main break. And that was great, and really that technology really started to diffuse, especially through our customer service base and our field technicians, who were and almost always the first on the spot in terms of a concern or some type of emergency. But what you'll see is we say one efficient workflow, and again, kind of a little bit easier to say now, given that we have the benefits of ArcGIS Online. But we had ArcReader out in the fields, and we had a technician, a really savvy person, come up with a means to utilize graphical tools via Microsoft Paint. So where ArcReader is wonderful, but a little bit lacking in those enhancing tools, he said, well, why don't we use Microsoft Paint? So he worked with his superiors and developed this workflow to go from ArcReader to Microsoft Paint over into Word. And where's Word significant? Because over on the right of that graphic, you'll notice that there's a main break report that our customer service technicians are required to send out when they're in the field. Now, I'm going to tell you about this in a moment, but after that template is filled out in Word and that graphic is placed neatly within that template, it's emailed out via Outlook. Well, imagine being out in the field during an emergency and in extreme cold, say during a main break. This process, we're told, can take 35 to 45 minutes to fill out. So a person under pressure, first on the spot, with the responsibilities to not only help handle this situation, but also communicate it out from the field. So again, 30 to 45-minute operation. Well, this is where we move into the GIS age. So, and you'll see this in just a couple of moments when Brad takes over and demonstrates several of our applications, but here's the GIS age. So we were approached, I would say, Brad, probably about 2 years ago by executives in our organization to say, look, we've heard about this ArcGIS online thing, and when we see what you all have been doing, is there any way that you can move that main break template over to something like that that can make it a lot easier for our technicians, but also allow them to communicate more efficiently back and forth from the field to the office? So I said, sure, let's put our heads together. And our philosophy has been always that the development of these products is very much an iterative process. So the folks that depend on us are very much as part of the process from beginning to end. So folks feel like what is being developed for them had been developed by them. So the idea of information at your fingertips is really important. You know, you have what you need, that critical information, whether you're out in the field or in the office. And along the top, and it has that classic, classic Esri look to this slide, but, you know, we made a little bit of a change to it to be pertinent to what we're showing here. So we see asset management and field mobility and our connected services and our planning and analysis. But along the bottom, you see from a desktop standpoint, mostly for in the office, the tablet for out in the field, whether it be a tough book or an updated tablet or otherwise. That mobile technology, we've gone from flip phone to now fully enhanced smartphones, whether it be an iPhone or more particularly an Android type phone. And then the web maps. And on the end, it's one thing to communicate back and forth in the field while things are happening, but the ability to do planning and analysis is really important. It's kind of, I call it like the post-game analysis, where you can actually look at what occurred, but also the planning part. So if we're talking about main breaks, that's you have an area or a series of breaks that have occurred on a section of main. Well, now you know that it's occurred, and you can really start to build that into your rehabilitation projects. So now Brad is going to take it away and bring us through our demonstration. Thanks a lot, Brad.
Great. Thank you, Jim. All right, I'm just going to switch it over to the browser here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically take you through a typical workflow of the life cycle of a main break. We use a number of different applications in order to be able to view them, and you're going to get an idea of how it's used and how it's utilized by different stakeholders throughout the workflow. So it's going to be starting off with our field workers, we're inputting the information, and then goes to people who are viewing this information on their desktops or other places. And then also, kind of as Jim referenced, with the more historical and planning purposes, this can be at a later time. What you're looking at here, as a side note, is an application. Many of you are probably familiar with this template based on the poll. It seems like a number of you are already using it. This is Web App Builder. Again, entirely out of the box. You know, it's a great application, and so we're able to build this with no custom coding or anything like that. So that's been great, and then we've received great feedback on it. So I'm going to jump right in and again act as if an actual main break is happening. Right now, what would typically happen is a call would come into our call center. could be a member of the public, police, anyone who sees anything on the street or wherever where they think it may be a main break or something like that. And they'll call it in, and that will be received. And at that point, it's not necessarily a main break. It's a possible main break. And so what will happen is they will send out what we call our customer service technicians, our first line of defense. They'll be sent out in the field to investigate the potential main break. And we say potential because it's not necessarily a main break. It could be just a false alarm, kind of like the alarm that happened earlier today here at this office. It could be just water leaking down the street. It could be somebody draining their pool, melting ice, something like that, or any other reason. But once they determine it is in fact a main break, that's where the applications come in. So then it gets logged as an actual main break. So you're seeing our entire system and beyond, obviously. All the points you see on the screen are main breaks, specifically from 2019. So those are all the main breaks that we've had in 2019. I believe there's about 40 of them, which is actually very, very light compared to a year ago, which we'll get into later. So typically what they're going to do is they're going to navigate by typing in the address, because these field technicians are actually equipped with laptops. So that's why we're using this application. So it's harder for them to locate their specific location as they would if they had a smartphone. So we're going to imagine there's a main break here, if you're on Lincoln Drive here in Lindenhurst, and pretty straightforward. I'm just going to click on here, add a main break. We're just going to snap it to the water main here in front of the house, and then we're going to put in all the basics and information about it in the attribute table. And it's, as any other application, very easy to put in. You'll see some red boxes for required fields that we added on there because some people weren't putting in some critical information. I'm going to put in a kind of a nonsensical number here because this is actually a live application, by the way. So what I'm putting in here will be seen by people, so I want them to know this is not a real point. So anyway, they can put in, it's not just main breaks, there are other types of things that you can see here, service leaks, hit hydrants, those kind of things. I'll just put main break for the purposes of the test. And then a list of names. Now bear in mind that the technicians are only putting in whatever information they have at the time. A lot of it may be just guesswork. They're not actually the ones fixing the main break. That will happen later by our construction maintenance crews, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So they'll fill out whatever information they have. And also, having these lists here of all the things, all the domains we have, you can see the different types here. I think Jim was talking about earlier. Most of our main breaks actually are cast iron. It's an older material. Most of our new ones typically are ductile iron at this point. But having those lists there really helps to eliminate a lot of the errors. You saw a screenshot of one of the old templates previously. Things were handwritten on there or hand typed on there, and that left a lot of room for error. A lot of things were mistyped, and a lot of things were hard to construe what they were trying to convey. Plus, it would obviously take a lot longer. Here, you're only getting the option of putting in whatever you want. I'm actually going to intentionally put in not the correct size so I can correct it later, for example's sake, but I'm just going to choose some options here and just kind of keep rolling. Very important to have the date. Obviously, that can be whenever. I'll just put in around this time. We'll put in the address for the one that we just went to, which is in Lindenhurst, and a few more pieces of information. They don't always turn off the water. Typically they don't, but if it's really bad, they need to turn off the water immediately, then they will, and we'll say that this is really bad because why not? So we'll just shut it down. We'll say we just shut it down, 12 o'clock. And then we'll just leave the rest blank. Again, that can be filled in later, except for actually the number of valves. It looks like there would need to be about 4 valves shut down. So we'll select that. Number of houses would be just like 4 houses. Yeah, and then I'm gonna actually put in that this is a test in here just to make sure people understand this is not a real main break, not a real emergency. And then we're just gonna save that, and of course that'll just appear on the map right there, and then they can see the date, so it's not confused with older main breaks. Now, in order to show what valves are closed and what houses are in fact impacted, unlike the other one, they had to bring in the paint and all that stuff. Everything had to be done individually. They individually circle each valve and individually fill in each parcel to represent each house. That was very tedious. This is very simple. I'm just going to select the impacted valve. So I'm just going to draw a circle around the valves in question, and then all in one shot. I could change the status of those. It's currently open. I could say it's a potential shutdown. In this case, we're actually going to shut it down. So let's do that. Hit save. symbology will change automatically. And then we'll do the same thing for the houses. I will just select those that would be impacted by a shutdown here on the street. There we go. They obviously have multiple options for selection tools. I prefer the free-form one, but that's personal preference. Again, both options here potentially affect the service and no service. We'll go with that and hit save. Now, obviously, to GIS people, seeing the symbols change is part of the course, but for the non-GIS people, they think it's really cool, almost magical, how things just change like that. And I'm really impressed. And again, no manual markup tools or anything like that you would see in Paint, anything like that. And so there you go. And there it is, live information. So all the people accessing this application can now see the status of the main break. They can click on the point, obviously see any of the attributes that were put in, and then what has been impacted. But to kind of complete the workflow, they also create a PDF. Put in the name here, just hit print. This is a typical out-of-the-box tool. Many of you are probably familiar with it. It's just going to basically create a PDF of what is on screen. And the reason we do this is, A, because some people don't have access to the internet and want to have a hard copy just to see a screenshot of what's going on at the moment. And also, this is our permanent record. So this PDF will then be attached back to the main break so that down the road in the future, they can look back and see what was impacted. Because obviously, after this main break is over and everything's put back to normal, those houses and valves will be changed back, and then that will no longer be reflected. So then this is created, and I can click on the point, click on our new PDF, and there it is, nicely created point here, beautiful automatic legend and everything like that. That can be saved out. And typically what's done is that's then saved attached to an email, which is sent out to our main break listserv. We have a listserv for anyone who needs to know about a main break is on the listserv, and they will get alerted to it. In addition to that, we also leverage the cool share tool. Again, many of you are probably familiar with it. It just auto-generates a hyperlink that will take you directly to this location on the map. And just to show those who aren't familiar what that does, again, this would typically be put in an email that's sent out so people can go directly to it, but I'm just going to click on it here just to show how that works. So it's opening up a separate application. This is not the one that I had on before. And in addition to opening the proper application, it's more specifically, it's taking us exactly to that geographic location, which is really nice so that people don't have to say, oh, okay, there's a main break over in Lindenhurst. If you just go to Lincoln Drive and yada, yada, this takes them right to there. It saves time, very efficient. People love that. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this. And then that basically covers that first segment for the customer service technicians. And that took me, I don't know, maybe 5-10 minutes or something like that. It would have been even quicker had I not been narrating the whole time. As opposed to what Jim referenced, it could take an excess of 30 to 45 minutes using the old system, which is very tedious. And oftentimes they might have been out there in the cold or rain or snow or whatever it is, and they didn't want to be dealing with that. So much better and huge time savings, and we'll get more into some of those time benefits later. I'm actually now going to switch back to the presentation part briefly. And now we're going to switch to the smartphone application. So the next segment in the life cycle here is our construction and maintenance department, specifically the supervisors. So again, they're the ones who actually go out and fix the main breaks themselves. They are equipped with smartphones, so for them we used Collector, which is great. I mean, many of you, as you saw, are familiar with or have already used Collector. So it's very simple and easy to use, even more so than using a desktop application. So that's been great. So typically, they're going out in the field and editing an existing point that's already been created by our customer service technicians. But of course, they also have the ability to add a new one as well if need be. Just to make things easier, I did not hook up a phone to this, so I did a screen recording of a typical workflow from the phone standpoint, so we'll go through that right now. So again, normally you would be going to your present location, but since I'm not actually out in the field, or wasn't when I created the screen recording, we still went to the address. We'll go to the same location that we were just in for the test point we just put in the application. By the way, as an aside, you'll notice that there's a little bit of different symbology. The colors around the edge, we have a separate symbology that actually indicates the status of the main break life cycle, and you'll see more about that later. So now they're going to click on the point. Hopefully this goes live and then you'll see that. Yeah, here we go. Again, straightforward. Many of you are familiar with it. You're just going to basically edit it. And so they're going to go through, make sure all the information is correct, and then they're going to either correct it or add information that's not already there. Hopefully this is actually running. It's running. And then you'll see them updating it. For example, I'd intentionally put in the main size is 6 inches. It's actually 8 inches, so they'll notice that and they'll go there and correct that. Put in the construction maintenance number that's unique to that department, so they would put in information like that. Correct the main size, as I mentioned, to 8 inches, and then update that, and then fill out some other information. Like, for example, they would be the ones who would fix the water main and then shut it off. So they're going to put in a time for when the water was turned back on. They put that information in there, and then whatever else information. Like, if the valve number was wrong, sometimes they have to expand it, impacted a larger area. That number can change, or the number of houses increases, for example, a number of different things, because they have better information, because they're actually going underground and seeing what's really happening. Then, of course, the ability to add attachments. So you can see this was an actual main break, a really bad one that happened not too long ago. So you can simply take a picture of that main break and attach it back to the point. So that's really convenient, because people can not only see what's happening in real time, but again, historically, they can see what the main break actually looked like, which is really useful. And you see that stats on the bottom there, like it said, crew deployed. So that was reflected in the symbology that we had. So that's basically the screen recording and our main break. Great. So now we're going to move back. So we got the dashboard. So that's kind of the field component to it and how people are inputting information. Now we're going to kind of go to the other side where people are using the information. So this is a screenshot, but I'm going to take you to the actual application, the dashboard. This, of course, is using Esri's operations dashboard. We happen to give this the same name because it was appropriate, because it's actually not just showing main breaks, it's also showing hydrants that are flushed or not, and that's very useful because this is used by a number of different entities, one of which is customer service. And so what's important from a customer service standpoint to be able to see main breaks is how they might impact a customer's water quality. So for example, somebody might call in, they might have like rusty water or odor or something like that. The water can be impacted by a nearby main break, or if we're doing routine hydrant and water main flushing in the area, and this way they can see both of those happening and say, okay, I see here that actually there was a main break nearby, or hydrant flushing, or whatever it is. So that's probably why, but it's temporary, and then it should be fine. So it's a useful tool for them to have. Now, obviously, you don't see any flush hydrants, but there's a reason for that. It's because, well, flush hydrants are things that we do manually on our own, and we wouldn't voluntarily do a flush hydrant in the middle of winter. That wouldn't make any sense. Whereas the main breaks tend to have the most main breaks happen, although they're out of our control, it tends to happen the most in the winter. Typically what we've seen is when it gets colder, the more main breaks there are, and that was absolutely the case a year ago. This year has been relatively mild here in the Northeast, so we haven't had as many breaks, but last year was the worst we've ever had. But I can actually just click on the dates here, and you can show you what it would look like with the flushed hydrants, for example. So if I go to 2018, and then I go to July, I can see what last summer looked like, and they tend to do it by zip code areas. And so here's an example of some flushed hydrants that were done in that particular area last July. And so now you can see those. And if you're not familiar with the dashboard, it's convenient because you can just click on a point, and then it'll zoom directly to that location. And then if you want, you can click on it and get more information, or click on it again and zoom right back out to your home screen. Same thing with main breaks. This one right here, this is the one that we just put in. Of course, it appears there. And again, that's normal for us to see a point that goes in one layer, show up in a different application. But for non-GIS people, that's, again, kind of magical. And it's really impresses them that it just kind of appears in the other ones, and thus showing up in real time, which is really powerful. And you can see how they can see that status there instantly, which is cool. But they can also see the other active main breaks that are happening right now. And these are active main breaks that are happening right now, with the exception, obviously, of the one that I just put in. And then down here at the bottom, you can also see the ones for the year. So if I actually click on 2019 over here, you'll actually see, again, all of the main breaks for the whole year of 2019. I also have the ability to go back and look at historic ones. So for example, if I go to last year, I put in January 1st to actually about 17th of last year, where I mentioned we had record-breaking cold. You will see a different story when that loads. Hopefully that will load. there'll be main breaks everywhere because, oh, I have to change this back here. Active breaks. Here we go. 19. Well, if you saw that, you would see there were main breaks basically covering the island because in the first 2 weeks of last year, there were a tremendous amount of main breaks. I think I have the numbers on a slide, but it was basically one of the coldest 2-week stretches we've ever had in our history, and the main breaks were unbelievable. So that's basically the dashboard. Again, decision makers, executives, or even people who are the managers of like the construction maintenance department have used it as a tool to kind of get a picture of what's going on in the field at a given time. So now I mentioned the other aspect of this, which is like the planning side of it, historical. So those are all what I showed you before, the kind of the real-time component to this, right? So this application, again, is used out of the context of when the main break's happening. You're seeing all of the main breaks we have for dating back till the year 2014. They're color-coded by year, so I can just show you the symbology real quick here. So you can see each year has a different color. That's what people have preferred to see. But the real power here is the ability to filter the main breaks. So this is specifically requested by the head of our construction maintenance department, so they can put it in by a particular date range. So I can turn this on and I can only see this year, or I can go to the old year and then say I only want to see, you know, service leaks, and then whatever it is, I can put in a range of size they want to be able to see this. Like I only want to see less than 4 inches or greater than 8 inches. Let me just put this back to main break just to show more results. And there we go, and there they are. All right, break type, a lot of options. And then they can see in the attribute table, again, a standard function, but it's very useful for them. So they can only see the ones that are in the results, see them laid out in the table. And then if they want, they can obviously export it to a CSV as well. So, and sort. And uses all kinds of planning tools, because again, this helps them identify where some of these hotspots are, where they can potentially allocate resources more efficiently. So for example, where we would want to potentially do main break replacements or new mains or whatnot, because we know that the quality has declined based on the main breaks. So that's basically that part of it. And then finally, as an actual bonus, this one's particularly exciting because this actually is brand new. So this is actually our website, our Water Authority website, public-facing website, and we now show the active main breaks or recently active main breaks on the website. And this actually just went live yesterday, so it's actually very exciting. Previously, all we had was a description of the main break of where it was, just basically described like the approximate address or the intersection. Now they can just actually see on the map. Obviously, they can search for the address. We kept it very simple, but the most important thing is so they can see where it is and they can search for their address and see if there's one near them. They can click on the point and get some basic information of where it is and how many houses were impacted. We didn't want to show too much information, but again, it's there on the website, brand new thing, so you're one of the first people to see it, probably before most of the people in our service area, actually. That's kind of funny. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to switch now back to the presentation, and hopefully I will get there. Here we are. One moment. There we are. So I mentioned last year, January, you can see the numbers, 267 main breaks in January alone. It was absolutely incredible. First 2 weeks specifically, you can see how many there were, and it very much coincided with the temperature being so cold and below freezing the entire time in the first 2 weeks of the month. Whereas, as I mentioned, this year we've only had 40 main breaks over that same time period. As a comparison, 3 years prior to that had been the previous record in terms of the number of main breaks, and this blew it out of the water. And most of those 267 main breaks happened in a 2-week period. So it was pure chaos from the field workers' standpoint because of how many people they were having to bring in. Managers were having to go out there, having to pull in contractors just to get all the main breaks fixed. But the good news is they were able to have these tools at their advantage, because back in 2015, they didn't have these applications available to them. So not only were they having those old templates and having to spend time doing that, they didn't have ability to easily see what was going on in the field. So pieces of paper were being handed out. It was very inefficient, and they didn't know what was going on. So we've got a lot of good feedback from the construction maintenance department in terms of how this has made things easier to manage, especially during the busiest time. And then as far as the time saving, I mentioned how quickly it takes to do a template now versus what it was before. This is 66 hours, you know, a week and a half, just from January alone, that's a time savings. You can imagine how much time is saved, and the headaches has been a huge, huge benefit to multiple departments, especially construction maintenance. So a lot of benefits across the board. So now I'm going to switch it back to Jim, and he's going to talk about how this all came together.
Brad, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. So the really important part of this graphic, and I mentioned earlier on the evolution of our products and how we work together. Again, I mentioned our philosophy has always been this really co-development. We partner with the people or groups that really are depending on us to create this, but it's a very iterative process. But the most important part of this graphic is that although we are GIS, our group, the application itself is at the center of this graphic. So you can see that how you have all these other groups as really participants and members and stakeholders, and everybody really feels a part of this process. The other part of it too, I want to talk about, very important, is the training sessions, is that our customer service technicians comprise probably about 36 individuals spread across the county in essentially 2 or 3 different major areas or regional offices. The important thing here is that we held those training sessions with them, but not everyone at one time, but they were small targeted sessions, 3 to 4 people at a time, maybe about an hour at a time. So not too much all at once, but enough to get them started. The interesting thing about the applications too is that, we can assume in this, we'll call it this GIS age or the computer age, is that, everybody's got a computer and everybody's familiar with it. But the people that we work with as our technicians, respectfully, if we look at the spectrum, and for folks that have been in the game for a while, like myself and some others that may be listening in, we know that there is a spectrum of end users. Everybody from the savvy user on the right side to the user, say, like on the left side, if you will, of this bell curve, that really, again, respectfully, may have even trouble finding the on button to that device or being able to navigate about, say, through a Windows environment or through, say, like an Android or an iOS environment. So we became, in a sense, of this live de facto help desk, but we were there really on site. So you could say it's live technical support, but not only the application, but the devices themselves. And what's important about that, even though at times it can be frustrating for both sides, in the end we come to resolution, but it really builds up their trust because people really feel supported when you're there, not just to hand out an application, but to follow them through the whole life cycle so everybody is comfortable on the same page is really important. And it goes a long way to when we develop future applications, that's a much greater, more, I would say, immediate acceptance of our presence and what it is that we want to provide to them. So there have been, thankfully, an awful lot of benefits to the Water Authority staff, and Brad had talked about a bunch of those. One of the things, too, is that having the ability to communicate essentially real time and really effectively from between the office and the field, it's really helped reduce down the amount of paper. It's reduced, what I would say is kind of a chaotic situation at times, especially as Brad mentioned earlier, an awful lot of main breaks at one time. You can imagine what a small dedicated group of people go through to get all that resolved. It's just an awful lot. So these applications have gone, thankfully, a long way to help. Another thing, too, as a side product is we've been told by folks in the field that have used our main break application that in the months when we don't have main breaks or not an awful lot of emergencies or main breaks, that a really nice byproduct of that is being able to view like the critical infrastructure, water mains and valves and hydrants and all these other things that we increasingly add into these applications, that it's been a real help to them. One other thing, too, and I mentioned it earlier on, is that data capture for future main replacement or for other information that we can add into that, it becomes something that we can look at later on and kind of quietly analyze and make some decisions on. And, we've had an awful lot of benefits to our own GIS department. One of the things, too, is that, as you can imagine, is that as people become familiar with, say, just a single application, they realize that there's an awful lot of capabilities that they didn't know about. The platform independence, that has just been wonderful, because whether it be a Toughbook or a tablet or a smartphone, whether it be an iPhone or whether it be an Android-based phone, these tools have worked really well within those environments. I mentioned about these strengthenings of relationships and these trusts, and we've really made some really great friendships. The thing, too, I also have to stress is that idea that those folks that may have been naysayers, and, you know, it sounds strong, adversaries, but they've really become our allies. And some folks that really didn't want to have much to do with what it was that we hope to provide have become our greatest champions, and that has been a real joy to us. It's really been great. You know, folks may say, well, I've been doing it this way for 30 years. And then suddenly later on, they see that there's actually real value in these applications. It brings them the information that they really critically need. And then that last point, again, is the possibilities are endless, but those end users realize that they can come to us, they come up with ideas, and they have a sense now that maybe there are possibilities. And to us, yes, the possibilities really are endless. Just to take you through quickly some of the current and then the future ideas. Our first true foray into ArcGIS Online was through a front counter product that was actually, I say it literally sits on the front counter, be our customer service and our customers themselves. Kind of a canned application, believe it or not. It was actually good old ArcView 3.2 based CII technologies. An Esri business partner was tremendously helpful to help migrate over that product. The next really serious foray into that and a real public-facing application was in WaterTrack. And maybe in the future we can talk a lot more about it, but essentially it was to show water quality both out of the ground and to the tap to both our customers, but it was really what I call a bi-county application, because it covers not only our county as Suffolk, but our neighbor to the west, Nassau, to actually include all the information about water quality from all the water districts, not only from ourselves and those within Suffolk County, but then probably 40+ water districts throughout there. You see the operations dashboard and a lot of other things that we talked about. On the other side of it is our future ideas, and a lot of them are really be coming into play now, especially in paving. So once the weather starts to warm up, we can really start to fully restore the roads after these main breaks and get them into place. And if we pop down to that last one, we see emergency planning and response, and that actually is an ArcGIS Online application, but it also is being built around Survey 123, which we didn't really necessarily jump in, but it seems like we're covering an awful lot of the offerings that Esri has put out there, and we've been thankfully some very happy beneficiaries of that technology. And I just have to quickly acknowledge, because this is really important, we have over 150 users of ArcGIS Online applications in various forms. But I want to say thank you very much, Krista, and to Dan Brennan and Seth Johnstone, Dawn Caravel, Esri out in Middleton. Thank you very much for your support. But I want to also say, along with my colleague, Brad Feldman, I'm blessed to work with a great team of people in my group in GIS, the core. Tom Withers, Caitlin, Ben, Rich, and Ty, my deputy and our director. Rich Reinfrank, Director of Customer Service Field, Chris Givens, Superintendent of Maintenance, Tom D'Angelo, he is our Field Customer Supervisor, Kevin Dirk, he's our Laboratory Director, and Bridget Dirk, who is the Coordinator of Lab and Sampling, and a whole lot of other people. So, you know, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jim and Brad. Great job today. We have a lot of questions coming in, so we will try to get to as many as we can. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. There we go. You guys should be able to see my screen. We're going to get to our questions now. Jim and Brad, we had a lot of questions from the attendees about the applications that you mentioned. Now, you mentioned them quickly. You talked about collector. You talked about apps dashboard. Do you want to just go through your workflow very quickly and maybe clarify which application was used for which process that you discussed?
Sure, absolutely. So the first application we showed, which is for our customer service technicians, again, our first line of defense, that's Web App Builder. So that's a desktop application that's used on laptops in the field with internet connections. The second step that we showed was the smartphone application. They're outfitted with Android devices, so that's Collector. So they have the ability to edit, put in points, edit existing points, in this case, the main breaks, and those are our construction maintenance supervisors who use that. Again, those are the ones who actually fix the main breaks. Then we have the dashboard, or what we call our operations dashboard. We actually have a number of different dashboards. That was actually just one example, but the operations dashboard is the operations dashboard. That's actually the same name that Esri calls it, that we use to see a lot of information in a easy to use format. That's not for the editing or anything like that. That's just for viewing information. And then finally, that final main break viewer that we had was another example of Web App Builder, just a different application. That particular one, I think, was a read-only one, but we have an editable one as well. But again, same application as the first one.
And Brad, if I could jump in for a second, the one thing I did want, I mentioned about the front lines, and it sounds a little strong worded, but between our customer service folks or in helping out our customers out there, and that dashboard is really tremendously helpful because our customer service folks, we've got about 40 plus folks out there in that office. They do a wonderful job, and they're oftentimes under a lot of pressure, and in many ways the same pressures that occur out in the field. So again, to have that information at hand, but also I talked earlier about confidence. We really give our confidence to our customers. Both Brad had shown just our newly released public-facing application via our website, but also when our customer service folks can actually see what's going on, they can convey with confidence and in the know to our customer on the other line.
You mentioned the website. Actually, one thing to add about that, that was actually very easy to do with ArcGIS Online as well. That's just a shared web map, so not an application, just the web map. And in the web map, when you go to the share tool, one of the options is to embed it in a website, and you can take that code and put it directly on your website, which is what we did.
Thanks, you guys. I saw a lot of these questions coming in, so I did bring up our website. If you guys take a look here real quickly, this is an ArcGIS apps website. It describes several of our different applications, many of the ones that you guys talked about today. So attendees, if you're interested in finding out more, I know there were a lot of questions and we don't have time to cover all of them today, but you can go to this website. You can check out what apps are available for the field, for the office, for the community. I've brought up the different ones here. You can find out more about Collector, Survey 123, and Operations Dashboard. Just to clarify some of the questions that came in about these applications, Collector in Survey 123 and Operations Dashboard is included with your ArcGIS purchase. It's part of the platform. Jim and Brad, do you want to talk about that at all? Because, I'm with Esri, and I'm sure people believe me, but from your side, purchasing ArcGIS, you're getting the whole platform, and these applications are part of it. You just configure them to fit your needs, correct?
Yeah, I would say we have pretty much everything at our fingertips. So we just increased our user base via licensing, which is really essentially nominal for the amount of value that our end users get, whether their ability to interact with Collector or their ability to view the dashboard. It's just essentially just adding some licenses, but you get an awful lot of licenses as part of the package when you do purchase Esri products. So we had a pretty good starter number of licenses. I don't recall, it could have been, say, 50 or otherwise. But
and by licenses, you mean the ArcGIS online login?
Yes, that's correct. I apologize. That's correct. Yep. I don't know. Do you want to add to that, Brad? Or?
Yeah, that's the beauty with ArcGIS Online. It's just, as long as you have the username and password, which is the license that they spoke of, you get access to all of those. I think we have about 150 active users at this point, and growing. Some of which, they're different levels. We need to get into that now, but depending on the user, some people that are just a viewer, just kind of read only, others have more editing capabilities, and those licenses are different prices, but some of our people just need to see information like on the dashboard, for example. Others, the field workers obviously need the ability to edit, so that's a different license level.
The one thing too I'd like to add, Krista, and along with Brad, is that if you can conform some of your data to what Esri asks, you can make ready use, literally out of the box, with minor configurations of these applications for very specific needs. And I know that Esri has a really great variety of applications for all kinds of needs. So they're coming from, through collector or Survey 123 or otherwise.
Well, especially the web app builder. I mean, I spoke about this before, but I'll say it again. I just noticed on the screen that Chris has just showed, it says like no coding required, and that is very much true. I mean, I'm an analyst, not a developer, and I was able to create these applications without any coding involved. It's all a series of widgets and user interfaces that are pretty intuitive. I mean, it takes some getting used to for sure, and there's some complexities when you dive into it, but you can do a lot without needing to do any custom coding, which is very empowering for the typical GIS person.
And I'll add to that, and again, for a guy that's been in the game a while and it's chased after coding for years, and there is a challenge for us GIS folks to keep up with technology on a regular basis. Things can change rather quickly, and as soon as you get kind of used to one thing, it kind of goes to the next. So not having to necessarily be an expert in coding has been a lifesaver for us.
Yeah, well, thanks for talking about that. There are a lot of applications that can be used. I'm scrolling through them on the screen now. But another point to that is you mentioned easy configuration, and that's definitely a key to being productive quickly. In addition to these apps, if the audience isn't familiar, I'm sure most of you are, but we do have pre-configured apps specifically for the water industry. So if you haven't looked at our solutions page, ArcGIS for water, you can go to solutions.arcgis.com, water, and under each one of these categories, you'll find some pre-configured applications for those specific workflows that were mentioned during the webinar. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this. We have a few more minutes, so let's go to some other questions. We had several audience members asking about CMMS systems. Are you guys using any, and how, if so, how does that integrate with the work you're doing?
Yeah, our customers are stored within an SAP environment, and it's kind of a tricky thing to be able to connect into that. And I'll just throw this out to everybody because it's become a kind of a recent realization to me that if you can get to the data and you can get it parked outside of a system, that's kind of hard to latch into. And I'd say sometimes the divide between real time and near real time is pretty difficult, where it's a wide divide. And so if you can get data parked outside of a system, that's necessarily hard to connect to into live. But if you can park it outside your system and latch into it and say it's on a daily or an hourly basis, that's oftentimes like plenty good enough for all the critical end users that we serve. So I know that's kind of a long answer, but CMMS, it really depends on the system and how kind of open it is to like outside applications or systems to latch in. Like, again, like as GIS folks, it's, we're not just map people, we're oftentimes systems integrators, so it still poses a challenge to us at times, and it's also a learning experience. So through the work that we do, we get exposed to other needs. If it's not necessarily GIS based, it's a challenge of how can we potentially connect in or share information between those type of systems.
Absolutely. Thank you. Another question we had goes back to the beginning of the webinar when you showed the demonstration and we discussed that a leak was identified, a possible main break. There were several questions about how do the field crews get notified that they need to go investigate. And then after they investigate, we saw the demonstration that they enter their information. If they confirm it's a main break, then the other crew comes out. But how is that initial communication kicked off?
Well, I mean, basically, we have the email listserv is where some of the information, sadly, is conferred. But I mean, the customer service, like I said, the call comes in, they alert directly in-house to their customer service technicians who then go out in the field. And then from there, everyone is kind of linked into the same system. So once things go in, not only do people see email that offers additional information, but people see all the main breaks as soon as they go in.
So you may have a customer that notices there's a bit of water out in front of their house. That can be the call in from the customer. We have an awful lot of people constantly out in the field, throughout the entire day, and then those that are on call. So they may actually spot something. So it's oftentimes a kind of a call in from the outside, but we do have a SCADA system, and we are the supervisory control and data acquisition system to oversee our operations so that we can actually kind of monitor things as they happen. So if we see a sudden, drop in pressure somewhere in the system, maybe near a plant site, we can react pretty quickly to that because we know that that is not normal, and we immediately deploy supervisors and a crew to assess the situation and then come to a resolution.
Thank you. It's just about 10 o'clock. We're going to do one more question. We had some inquiries about disconnected and connected. So do you guys have any areas that you don't have cellular service or the crews aren't able to be real-time connected? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we kind of talked about, the Stone Age and the Middle Age, but we do keep, our group does produce on an annual basis water system atlas. It's about 250 pages. It covers over 600 miles, so that is a fallback position. We haven't necessarily gotten into disconnected editing just yet, or actually the ability to, let's say a tile or bring data out in the field from, say, like a collector or a standpoint of the new products, but we're going to employ that. We're also going to be moving over eventually to a portal environment, and we're also putting all our data as we speak within a water utility data model.
I'll also just add, I mean, we're not using disconnected editing. Typically, from a practical standpoint, if they're in kind of a dead spot, they do what they can. So if they can't, you can put in information and not save it, or oftentimes, and then they can just save it once they get into an area that has service. Or if they can't pull it up at all, then they can just put it in once they do have service, or once they're right off site, which is less ideal. But obviously, you don't. Although it's nice to be physically standing where you're located, they can obviously put in a point no matter anywhere on the map that they want.
And the other side of it is a dispatcher in the field or a supervisor back in the office. They can communicate and have that person in the office that might have more reliable connections to be able to put that information in.
Yeah, various people do cover for others, or if there's missing information that other people can see the application or even see the back end. So we kind of work as a team to make sure the information gets in. But most of the time, service is not an issue, but occasionally it will be, and then it'll get resolved usually within short order. And so it's still near real time, as Jim said.
Right. Thank you so much, you guys. And I love that you're sharing your story and your transition and that you're still moving forward. I know disconnected editing and disconnection in general is a popular topic to our customers, and our applications can work in disconnected environments. So if you're interested in that, complete the survey at the end of the webinar and we'll have someone reach out to you. Thank you again. It was a great presentation. The alarm at the beginning brought a lot of excitement. Don't worry about that. It was very enjoyable. We have a great audience, so they were rooting for you, just so you know. The comments were coming in, and they were super excited to have you continue. So thank you for working through that. I appreciate your time today, and I hope to see everyone at our next webinar.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Take care.